Welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse, coming to you live from the beautiful state of Ohio, where you can still afford to buy land. So, from Biden to Trudeau to Klaus Schwab, our favorite supervillains, the message is the same. A massive global food crisis is looming. There's a lot of questions that arise. Will the grocery store shelves be empty in America? If so, when? And what can the average person do to prepare, even those that live in apartments or very small homes with no lawns? On today's show, I'll be asking all these questions as more and more as we try to grasp what is potentially the largest threat to mankind. Before we get started, I have a few messages for you. If you aren't following me yet on social media, head on over to Telegram or Truth Social, where you can find me in both places as Man in America. That's where I'm the most active. That's where I'm also the least censored, which is great. If you want to also listen to the show on podcast format or find any of the other places where you can watch, listen, and follow, they're all in the description below. Also, today's show is brought to you by Rise TV. Rise TV is literally the reason I can do Man in America full time. With the big tech censorship and how much they hate people like me for telling the truth, it's really hard to make a living. And that's why we built Rise TV. Because right now we're at war and it's an information war. And Man in America, it's how I'm fighting. So on Rise TV, we have a massive content library. And if you'd like to join the Q&A, which is always at the end of my shows, there's a link for a free trial in the description below. I hope you come check it out. Again, it's a free trial. Come see what's there. You can watch some great film, over 400 movies over there. Plus, we have these beautiful community-centric Q&As at the end of every show that I do. I think you'll end up staying. And look, as you'll see in today's show, I believe we have some very shaky times ahead of us. A lot of folks are looking for ways to protect their wealth. I've always been one to recommend physical gold and silver. That's exactly what I do. And the past year, a lot of you have asked me if I had any recommendations to where to get gold or silver. I was always hesitant to recommend anyone before because there's a lot of shady people out there. However, after doing a lot of extensive research, I'm confident in recommending Noble Gold. So you can buy gold and silver directly and have it shipped to you, or you can do an IRA transfer. Let's say you have all your retirement sitting over with Vanguard and you want to pull some of it or all of it out of the stock market and put it into physical gold or silver. Noble Gold specializes that, and they do it in a way that you don't have any taxes or penalties. So if you want to learn more about this, open a new tab right now and go to goldwithseth.com. Or you can call 877-646-5347 to speak to an expert right now, and that's a real person here in America. It's again, 877-646-5347. All right, folks, this is going to be an important show. And look, I'm not one, as I've said before, I'm not one that is a fearmonger, but I'm also really trying to be honest about where we're at. And I know there's a lot of good things happening. There's a lot of these things that are happening that say, hey, we're winning, whether it's Hunter Biden's laptop or some of the things to do with the election I can't talk about on YouTube or Facebook, which is a quick side note. If you're still watching me on YouTube or Facebook, at least please head over to Rumble and watch me on Rumble, because I don't know how long I'm going to last on YouTube or Facebook because they don't like me, because I tell the truth and I expose them and all the communist ties behind them. So at least please go watch me over on rumble.com and subscribe there. It's a fantastic website. Anyway, beside the point, today's show is important because I think that what's ahead of us is the greatest threat that mankind faces. And I know that there's a lot of people that are saying that it's the jab and the fallout from that. It's, many other things, but honestly, nothing will hit people like the food supply and shortages of the food supply. And if you combine that with what I believe is a coming collapse of the US dollar based upon a lot of different things, which I'm not going to get too much into the financial aspect in today's show. I'm just going to be focusing on the food crisis. I've covered that extensively in my previous shows, and I think probably pretty soon I'll do a much deeper dive focused specifically on what's happening with the global financial situation, because I do believe that the US dollar, which is a fiat currency, which I think has been a tool since the very beginning of the globalists to really, I think in the end, screw us. and eventually move us into their central banking digital currency. I believe from the beginning, it was their intention to set up this fiat currency, the US dollar, pump it up, separate it from the gold, so it's no longer backed by gold, happened in the 70s, and then pump, 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 print, 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 cause massive inflation. But we don't really see it though, because they're lending that money to other countries. That the US dollar is also the petrodollar, so it's tied to the sale of oil. There's all these artificial things externally that are or actually real things that are artificially holding up the strength of the US dollar. We're not seeing the reality of what the US dollar really is. We've been living in a little bit of a fairyland bubble for the past 50, 60 years or so. But I believe that that is also coming. That's also right around the corner. So if you combine that with global food shortages, it actually spells the perfect equation for the Great Reset, which is to get us onto a central banking digital currency, get us onto their way of eating things, right? You hear Bill Gates talking about eating bugs and getting off of meat. They have a whole other host of plans, but fundamentally what it does is the food and money supply, it forces us into their system, into their beast system. So today's show, we're going to be talking specifically about the looming food crisis and also what is it? What is this food crisis? And I've got some great research and some videos to show you exactly what's behind it, because it's not just something made up. It's not another, COVID pandemic where they're just pumping it up, pumping it up, pumping it up. There are very real things that are happening that will absolutely affect our global food supply and already are. And so I'm going to talk about what's already happening and what I believe that we're going to be seeing in the next year or so, because the food supply right now, we're living off a lot of the food that was grown last year. But what's going to happen, so last fall, for instance, in America, we had a bumper crop. We had a great amount of, corn and soybeans and wheat coming in. But we're going to look at what's happening from here forward. So I'm going to be looking specifically at what I believe that we can expect to happen in America over the course of the next year. And I'm also going to be discussing towards the end of the show, and probably even more so in the Q&A, what you can do to prepare for this and what we have done historically as a country when we've been in a situation where we've been facing food shortages. So I'll be looking at what did the United States do in the time of World War I and World War II. What did we do at those times to protect ourselves? Because there were massive food shortages then. So we're going to get into that. But I'm going to go ahead and start with a video from our favorite supervillain, Mr. Klaus Schwab. Okay, and this is a video of him just describing this. Now, here's an important point. I know that a lot of times these talking head globalists, whether it's Biden or Trudeau, who's been talking about the food shortages, or Klaus Schwab, they're talking about it and like, yeah, you're just trying to scare us. And that's true. I believe they are trying to instill a sense of fear in us. We've seen that excessively over the past 2 years. But they're also telling us what is coming, because this is what they want to happen. And I'm going to show you that too. I'm going to prove to you in the latter half of this video that the government is knowingly deceiving us and knowingly leading us away from the things that will protect us. And they're leading us into a system that will harm us and force us into their surveillance state. So let me go and pull this video up from Mr. Klaus Schwab. I'd tell you to enjoy this, but I don't think that it's something that you're going to enjoy.
We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected.
Again, just a short little clip there, but this is the reality. They're saying that it's not just food, it's energy, it's communication, it's fuel. These are all tied together. And even a simple crop like wheat or corn or soy, they affect everything for us in terms of our food. How much soy is in our food? How much corn? And we don't realize that these crops, these core crops, are at the very beginning of the building blocks of our modern agricultural system, all the food that we eat. Even if you're eating beef, we'd say, well, how is beef affected by the corn prices? Well, what do these animals eat? And for a lot of the cattle in America, and actually all over the world, they're eating the corn that we grow. So what happens if the corn gets more expensive, the beef gets more expensive? What happens if the fertilizer gets more expensive? But that's also something we're going to be digging into, is what's happening with the fertilizer. All right, so let me go and pull up a video here. Now, this is Tucker Carlson, who recently covered this. And this is a good reminder for you, is that when information gets to the point where you have someone like Tucker Carlson doing a primetime slot on the coming food crisis, one point is that it's really getting a lot more real. But more importantly, point B is that that means a lot more Americans are also now having that switch go off and say, hey, we better go buy some food. Do you remember what happened with toilet paper at the beginning of the pandemic? You couldn't even buy toilet paper because everyone started panic buying. So if Tucker Carlson is on mainstream prime time, reaching millions of people talking about the coming food shortage, I know that for a lot of you, you've been seeing this coming, whether you're watching what I'm doing or you're following Bards FM, which Scott Kesterson deserves a massive shout out because he's been sounding this alarm for months now, even over years. He has been really hitting on this, the importance of becoming sustainable, being able to support your own family, be able to produce your own food. So while you may have known about this a couple months ago or even a couple of years ago, like I did, I've been prepping and purchasing food and doing, setting up gardens and even learning how to garden, which is an important part, the best part of the past couple of years. You have to realize a lot of Americans, it's now going to start hitting them. So the place where you buy your seeds, it may not be available. In fact, this morning, my wife and I, as you know, we have chickens. We're buying more chickens. We're getting a dozen more chickens. But we were calling up into an Amish area in Ohio to get some organic chicken feed. Well, we found out the chicken feed that we were going to purchase went from being, I think it was around $400 or so per 1,000 pounds of this organic chicken feed. And that was probably a month and a half ago that my wife last talked to them. She called them this morning. This is an hour ago. That same chicken feed, which was $400 for 1,000 pounds, is now over $900 for 1,000 pounds. This is very real, folks. And we're talking, and she's like, oh my gosh, like this is expensive. I said, well, the best time to buy it is still right now, because in 2 weeks, right now it's $900 for 1,000 pounds. In 2 weeks, it could be $1,200. In 2 months, it could be $2,000. So again, I know it feels like we're coming into this late, but right now is still the best time, right? It's one of the old sayings from the old Eastern wisdom, right? When is the best time to plant a tree? It's 20 years ago. When's the second best time? It's right now. So, and I'll be getting this toward the tail end of the show, that if you haven't done a lot towards prepping yet, I know it's easy to feel overwhelmed, but please don't, because even by taking steps today, taking steps this week, the following month, you can do so much to secure the future of your family. And you're still going to be way ahead of the curve past a lot of other people. So let me go and play a little segment from Mr. Tucker Carlson. And he starts with President Biden talking. So I'm sorry to show you his face, but you have to understand what the resident is saying about these things, because it's important for us to understand what other Americans are watching. So check this out.
With regard to food shortage, yes, we did talk about food shortages. And it's going to be real. The price of these sanctions is not just imposed upon Russia. It's imposed upon an awful lot of countries as well, including European countries and our country as well. And because both Russia and Ukraine have been the breadbasket of Europe in terms of wheat, for example. Just to give you one example.
Food shortages, Biden said, quote, they're going to be real. Once again, in case you missed it, to repeat, food shortages, not in Sudan, in Cincinnati, in Reno, in Spokane, and Norfolk, and of course in our big cities too, where not a single person who was born here has any idea what a food shortage is. Our problem has always been having too much food. Now we won't have enough. We know that because the President of the United States just told us that on camera. So what is this going to mean? How do food shortages affect a country? Well, if you're interested, go online and read about it. All of recorded history will answer your question. A food shortage is not like deciding to skip dessert. It's not a diet. It's not voluntary. A food shortage is different. It's scary. Food shortages topple governments. They turn moderates into revolutionaries. A food shortage is a big deal. You don't want one. But now we're getting one, just a little over a year into Joe Biden's presidency. Think forward. If the traditional calendar holds, we've got 1,032 days left of the Joe Biden administration. And you wonder what things will look like by then. We're already speeding toward dystopia. Not that the White House seems aware of it or to care in any way. Here's Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen from the...
So there you have it from the horse's mouth of Mr. Biden. This is coming. And what they're getting into, as Tucker continued his segment, was how they're talking about gas prices. They're trying to downplay these things. And as I told you in the second half of the show, I'm going to prove to you that the White House is knowingly misleading us by showing you how our government acted, earlier times around World War I or World War II, how they became so proactive in helping fix the real root of the problem here with food supply. So I'm not going to show you, because once you start hearing this, okay, you hear Joe Biden talking about food shortages, and Trudeau talking about food shortages, and you hear Klaus Schwab talking about it. You might see articles floating around about how there's a new bird flu spreading in America, which is true. And they're now requiring, this is insane. I was going to show you this today, but I didn't have time to put it in here. They're now in certain states, I think it's Georgia and one other state, they are now blocking the sale of chickens unless the chickens have had a PCR test. You couldn't make this stuff up, right? In the future, they're going to look back and they're going to write comedies about what happened at this time in history. So literally, there's areas where this flu is spreading. It's a bird flu, right? And they are saying that you can no longer buy and sell chickens unless those chickens have had their PCR test. It's absolute insanity. But these things are orchestrated on purpose. So I'm going to show you a video, and this actually, again, I came through this through Bards FM and Scott Kesterson. And this is a very intelligent man describing what's really happening and describing how what's happening in Ukraine and Russia is going to affect the global food crisis and how it's really kicking it off. And I've covered recently in one of my previous shows about how whether or not Putin invading Ukraine was just a giant trap to kick off the Great Reset and its next steps. And though I believe that it wasn't something he actively chose to do for fun, I think he was forced into it. If you look at the ramifications of what's coming out of what is happening in Ukraine, you can see that it is accelerating this plan. So watch this video. It's about, it's a minute and 11 seconds long, but watch this and really pay attention because this is a very important video.
About 15% of the world's calories come from wheat. About a third of that wheat comes from Russia, Ukraine. Russia has banned export of wheat. The wheat spring planting season is like now, this week. And there's not a lot of planting going on. So not only is the current wheat supply in Russia, Ukraine blocked up and cannot make its way to countries in Africa and elsewhere, but the future planting season is now significantly at risk. And again, that's 15% of global calories. And just to take a step back, the whole planet Earth operates on a 90-day food supply. Once we stop making food, humans run out of food in 90 days. And that's not just linearly across all nations. What happens is the most vulnerable nations lose their food supply first, and the richer nations buy that food supply to secure their population's calories. And so you very quickly see a bifurcation happen where suddenly famine is a real risk. And we already have about 800 million people on Earth that are subsisting on below 1,200 calories a day. So this very quickly tips the bucket in a significant way in a number of countries that's going to be really awful. And that's just on the wheat supply and wheat planting problem.
So as you said, that's just talking about the wheat supply, right? Where he's saying, to touch upon a few points, that the 15% of the world's, or I forget the exact figure, but a large chunk of the world's overall food intake is wheat, and a large part of that is coming from Ukraine and Russia. And so what have we done? We've hit Russia with sanctions. And so the sanctions are stopping their export of wheat. But what's also happening is, this is key, is what he talked about. Remember I said earlier, is that right now we're not eating the food we grew yesterday. We're eating the food that we grew last season. The animals that we're eating are eating the food that was grown 2 seasons ago, right? So that's just this, it takes time to catch up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about timelines in the second half of the video, especially when I think this will start affecting America. When are you going to start going in the grocery store and really seeing significant changes? Because I believe that's coming. But as he said in his video, it's not just the wheat, it is also the fertilizer, et cetera, which we're going to talk about in my next article I'm going to be showing you. But as it relates to the planting season, as you mentioned, in Ukraine, they're now missing their planting season. They've got tanks rolling through, they've got gunfire. They can't be out there farming and planting wheat. Yet Ukraine, in many ways, is one of the bread baskets of the world. They export a massive amount of what they're growing. And so the coincidence of having Ukraine shut down with war as one of the major domino just flicking the domino to get the food crisis started. Again, it seems too perfect for this great reset plan. So I'm going to now get into an article, and this is a little more reading, okay, that this is a fantastic article. I'm going to pull it up for you. This is a very important article written on Doomberg, which is on Substack. So you can just search for Doomberg Substack to find this. And there's a fair bit of reading here, but there's also some charts I'm going to show you, because what this is doing is this is really breaking down the exact elements that will lead to this global food shortage. Because it's easy to see, Tucker Carlson say, well, a food shortage, and you see Klaus Schwab and to shrug it off, right? I think that in a lot of ways we're used to that, especially because we have all the climate change pushers. They've been telling us for a long time, we're all going to starve to death, there's global warming, and I don't know about you, but I've just tuned that stuff out. But this is very different. So let me go ahead and read some of this article to you. So he starts with a quote by Dwight D. Eisenhower, who says, "Farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 100,000 miles from the cornfield." Really important quote when he comes back to that. So he starts talking here about the perfect storm. And he's talking about how the weather conditions, everything hit at this perfect time to create the most perfect storm. And maybe you've seen the movie. So what he says here, he says, while the concept of a perfect storm is often too casually assigned in popular culture, it is difficult to find a more apt description of what has been unfolding in the global agriculture markets over these past several months. The tempest caused by the European energy disaster has merged with the hurricane of consequences flowing from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, forming the genesis of a generational crisis in food that will leave few unaffected. Now he says, in a financial crash, the correlation between all asset classes converges to 1. Now, my understanding of that, I'm not a financial guy, is that basically in a crash, everything crashes. Everything converges into one downward spiral. Like, you might have a dip, right? You might have the stock market dip and then something else goes a little better. But this is a correlation of everything aligning together to create a perfect storm. So he says, the coming crash in global food supply will be driven by a similar phenomenon across virtually every input into farming. They are all spiking to historic highs simultaneously. Supply availability is diminishing across the spectrum, and the time to reverse the worst of the upcoming consequences is rapidly running short. And the more you listen to our leaders, they're supposed to be protecting us, the more you can see they're ignoring this. And in fact, they're not just ignoring it, they're perpetuating it. They're causing it. So he says here, we begin with the price of fertilizer. And I'll take a side note here to say that fertilizer is one of the key elements to understanding the entire global food crisis. So really pay attention to this. So the price of fertilizer, which has been soaring to record highs across the globe, key sources of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, important inputs into soil fertility, crop yield, and plant maintenance have all gone vertical. Ammonia is derived directly from natural gas, and the price of natural gas outside of the US has gone vertical. It's no surprise that the price of ammonia has tripled over the past 12 months. Belarus is the third largest supplier of potash in the world, and its state-owned miner, Belaruskarly, declared force majeure after sanctions were imposed by the US and Europe. The number 2 supplier of potash globally is Russia. Perhaps front-running the Russia move on Ukraine, China halted phosphates exports last fall in an effort to ensure adequate domestic supply. They saw this coming. China saw this coming. The combined impact of these events can be seen in the Green Markets North American Fertilizer Index, which tracks a blend of fertilizer prices globally. So look at this chart. And for those of you that are tuning in on the radio or podcast, I'll describe it to you. But what this chart is showing is this is the Green Markets Fertilizer Price Index. So this is a conglomerate of a merger of the overall fertilizer prices and put together. So if you look at this chart, you can see the prices were relatively stable from 2017 to 2018. You saw a slight increase in 2018. We're looking at a line chart here. Drops down in 2018 a little bit. It's really even up until mid-2020. So again, if you're looking at these things, you can easily see that coronavirus, the pandemic, was step one in this Great Reset. The war in Ukraine was step 2. And there's already a step 3, 4, 5, and 6 that they've already planned, which I'm sure that we'll be seeing coming. But just looking at this, you can see that as you get into mid 2020 and into 2021, you see a sharp spike in the prices. As he mentioned, it's gone vertical. And yes, if you look at this, since the war started, it's almost vertical, the increase in fertilizers. So what does this mean? He continues, weed control is an important element of farming, and herbicides are an irreplaceable tool in the farmer's repertoire. The most heavily used herbicide in the world is the controversial molecule glyphosate, known widely by its retail brand of Roundup. So invented by Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer in the 70s, glyphosate has been linked to certain blood cancers and is targeted for elimination by many environmental groups. Despite these concerns, glyphosate remains a systematically important molecule. Many seeds have been genetically modified to be resistant to it, allowing for its widespread use and minimizing damage to crops. And generics have expanded the market as it came off of Monsanto's patent. So let me just tell you a little bit about what this means. And this is going back in this. So similar to at the beginning of the show, I talked about the Federal Reserve. And I talked about how the Federal Reserve, from its outset, especially after the dollar was removed from being backed by gold, it was a fiat currency. It was a fake currency. It was printed, funded by the European bankers, loaned to the United States for us to then use as our currency. But then it was established as the global currency. If you look at what's happening with agriculture, you can see the exact same thing playing out. And again, this is what makes me believe that all of these things together, they are the perfect storm. But it's the perfect storm that was enacted and planned by these globalists. And the CCP is very involved in this process because they want to bring America to its knees, because America has always been the country, look at when Trump was in, that has stopped them from carrying out their own advancing towards a global communist system. So if you look at what's happening with Monsanto, you can see that it's interesting because I've been looking into Monsanto for quite some time. In the past decade or so, I've been studying them. You can see, their ties to Bayer. It goes back into Agent Orange, and a lot of very, very evil things that the company has done. But this could be potentially the worst, because what they've done is they have built an entire agricultural system that is built on glyphosate, is built on their Roundup, meaning that the seeds that most farmers are growing, so I live in Ohio. I drive around and I see fields of corn and soy and wheat. Those seeds are all Monsanto seeds. Those seeds are genetically engineered to be resistant to the chemicals that are found in their Roundup. So when the farmer sprays the plants, so the corn itself is not affected by the pesticide, but all the other plants are. Now, I'm not going to get into how bad this is for our soil, and not to mention it, bleeding into our water systems, causing cancer, et cetera, which has been proven now. They've been sued, and people have won lawsuits against them for this. But what they've done is that they have set up an entire agricultural system that is centralized so that if they want to collapse it, they can. So just by strategically, if they were strategically targeting Ukraine and they wanted this war to happen with Ukraine and Russia, they knew that would then kick off something where all the farmers that are now on the teat of Monsanto and that can only produce their crops with Monsanto chemicals and Monsanto seeds, overnight they can collapse the global agriculture system. And this is the problem I have. One of the million problems I have with globalism is that it puts the control into the hands of the few. You see, if farmers across America all had their own farms and they were fertilizing using their own manures from their cows or their chicken coops, etc., they couldn't be controlled like this. But because it's become a centralized system, especially the manufacture of the chemicals that you need to have, you have to spray your crops to even get them to work. The soil's so dead that only through the chemicals from Monsanto can your crop survive. All of a sudden, oh my goodness, there's no more materials to produce these pesticides and these herbicides. And so now they can collapse the global agricultural systems. So let me dive back into that article. So what they're saying here, if farmers skimp on the herbicides to get by this season, it only makes dealing with weeds more challenging in the future. As one expert warned us, it only takes 1 year of negligence to do several years of damage to a field. So here you're looking at the glyphosate market price in China, this particular graph. Again, showing that glyphosate, the price of it has gone almost vertical since mid last year. Okay, now continuing. Once again, we discover that so now we're getting into natural gas, because what he's also explaining here, as you mentioned, is that natural gas is one of the key components to making fertilizer. So when Joe Biden is putting all this crackdown, all these restrictions on our ability to generate our own natural gas, you might think, oh, well, it's going to make my house more expensive to heat, or it's going to make something else more expensive. But what you also don't realize is how much of a role natural gas plays in creating fertilizer, the fertilizer that must be used to give us a yield of crops. Okay, so again, here's they say. Once again, we discover the vital role natural gas plays in many downstream verticals, a key theme of many Doomberg pieces. This is their blog. With inventories at record lows and supplies constrained, the retail price of diesel in the US smashed previous record highs. In Europe, which depends heavily on Russian imports for both diesel and its semi-processed oil precursor, the wholesale market is on the verge of breaking. Here's an updated version of the chart. So this chart, for those of you listening in on it, you can't see it, this is showing the European wholesale diesel price. As you enter into the time period of the last couple of months, you see a straight vertical, right? So this is why he's saying this is a perfect storm. All of the components that you need to ensure a global food supply are doubling, tripling, quadrupling, and more in price instantly. So as he says here, now, as expensive as it is to fuel the field equipment needed to farm, keeping them operational at all is becoming an ever-growing challenge. So remember, diesel fuel, if you see the big John Deere tractors, the big commercial tractors out there, which I see them all the time in Ohio, those are diesel engines. They need diesel fuel to run. But that's not all. So what he's saying is that there's an ever-growing challenge. He's saying that the same chip shortage constraining automobile production has struck the farming equipment industry, making new equipment and spare parts harder to come by. So now it's like they can't afford the fertilizer, they can't afford to put the diesel in their trucks or their farm equipment to run, and they can't get the chips. Listen to this. This is insane. So Jim Boyer, an Emmett County farmer, had a similar personal anecdote. He's awaiting a $40 emissions-related sensor for his tractor, and he's not sure if it will arrive anytime soon. So this guy is a farmer literally waiting on a $40 sensor for his tractor. Here he says, I cannot drive that tractor, a $250,000 piece of equipment, because I can't get that sensor. Incredible. He continues. The other issue farmers are facing is labor. Here he says, farmers are also competing with other sectors for a limited pool of labor. The gap between job openings and unemployed but willing workers across the entire United States continues to widen. So to describe this chart to you, you see there's two lines on this line chart. One is the open positions. So you see that there's a spike of open positions as we came into 2020. There's a huge shift in the job market, of course, because of COVID, right? Sorry, no, that was the job seekers, meaning that at the beginning of COVID, a lot of people, their jobs changed, they lost their jobs, and there was a spike in people looking for jobs. Now, there were very few open positions, so you had a high unemployment rate. But what's happening, though, is that is reversed, whereas now there's less and less job seekers and more open U.S. positions. One of the reasons being is that the government is paying people to not work. How many stories have you heard about that? I was in Home Depot, this is a few months ago, and there was a guy working, and there were very few other workers there. And my wife asked him, why are there so few workers, and how's it going for you right now? And he said, they're having a hard time paying people to work. And even his good friend that was working stopped working because he was making more money collecting unemployment and COVID relief benefits from the government than he was working. And this guy chose to work because he wanted to set a good example for his son that you don't just sit around and collect handouts from the government. So remember we talked about the US dollar earlier and how much money they're printing? Because now they have this fiat currency, which is completely unhinged. So everyone thinks, oh, the economy is great. We got our COVID relief packages. I got my $1,400 check. I'm going out to Applebee's to celebrate. Well, the government is just printing, 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 and printing. And the inflation hasn't caught up yet. But when it does, it's not just going to catch up. It's going to collapse so much. So back to the article, he says, even generously assuming farmers can cobble together enough fertilizer, herbicide, machinery, and labor to produce a good harvest this fall, they may be left to deal with yet another crisis of supply that few off the field have on their radar: propane. So the U.S. exits the winter of 2021-2022 with concerningly low levels of propane inventory, well below typical averages for this time of year. So he shows it on a graph. He says, here's the supply situation in chart form with the shaded regions signifying the high and low inventory levels over the past 7 years. So you can see there's a white line, which is the 7-year average. Okay, that's you're going from seasonality. So obviously you'd see that as you head into winter, there's more propane. As you exit winter, there's a lot lower. Well, where we're at with 2022 is a historically low level of propane. So how does that affect the ability to grow crops? Well, he says, many farms are located in rural areas without ready access to natural gas. And some 80% of grain dryers in the US, for example, rely on propane as a fuel. So what this means is that, if you drive through the Midwest, you'll see these big silos. So the big silos are where they store their corn, where they store their wheat. That's where they store the grains, whatever they're harvesting. But if those grains aren't dried enough, they will mold, and you'll have an entire silo ruined because of mold. And so, especially if there's a little bit heavier of a rainy season where the grains have extra moisture to them when harvested, they have to be able to dry them first using grain dryers. Now, if they're in a more rural area where they don't have a direct hookup to natural gas, which we're already seeing natural gas is spiking. So, of course, we're going to see the increased cost in natural gas for drying. But for a lot of them, they're actually relying on propane to dry their grain. But now we're seeing propane is spiking. Okay, then it gets into, he talks a little bit about how the politicians have completely screwed us with all these policies to ban energy, drilling and ban pipelines. Like they are actively driving us into the ground with their actions. So here he's summarizing this article. And if you read their blog, it's very serious. They don't use their words lightly. But here he says, we believe that we are at the onset of a global famine of historic proportions. In a staggering defiance of logic, many U.S. politicians are still attacking the lifeblood of our own energy production infrastructure. Again, this is not just about gas prices. It's so easy for us to look at Biden and say, oh, stupid Biden, I'm paying $6 a gallon now for gas. This affects us so much more than just gas prices. Here it continues. As Eisenhower aptly identifies in our opening quote, distance has an anesthetizing effect on the observer of any occurrence. Meaning, this is my own words, if you're not close to it, you can greatly undervalue it, you can greatly oversimplify it, and you can greatly underestimate it. He continues, one wonders how many people will starve before our politicians get serious. The populations most at risk of falling off the edge are half a world away, and we worry that the number is uncomfortably high. At Doomberg, which is their blog, we pride ourselves on seeing patterns early and being months ahead of the news flow. We are consistently human-centric. Now listen to this. Never have we been more certain in our beliefs while fervently wishing that we are wrong. A global famine is no joke, and correctly forecasting one would bring no joy. So that's heavy. I know it is. I got one more short video to show you here, and we're going to get into what this means.
So now we're talking about a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe because Ukraine
So just so you know who's talking, this is the UN food chief that's talking. Here, I'll go and start over. We're only 6 seconds in. This is only 23 seconds, this video.
So now we're talking about a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe, because Ukraine, from the breadbasket of the world now to bread lines, we never would have dreamed anything like this would be possible. And it's not just decimating dynamically Ukraine in the region, but it will have global context impact beyond anything we've seen since World War II.
This is going to have global context and an impact greater than anything we've seen since World War II. Now, I just want to go over, just remind you, I am not going over this stuff to scare you. I'm not trying to be a doomsday type of person, but I'm trying to shake you a little bit. I'm trying, and maybe it's actually a good thing if you get a little bit scared and you say, you know what, honey, let's go to Costco this week and let's buy some rice. It's good to have that in you because this is what I believe is coming. And look, if you bounce around Telegram and you see all these people talking and they're saying, oh, the Hunter Biden laptop and things with the election, and this is what's happening in Wisconsin and Georgia. And look, there's some great things, even Ron DeSantis, right? Really, hammering on Disney and their pedophile empire. But this is what worries me, is that no one's talking about this. No one's explaining to you what's coming. People like myself or Scott Kester's here. Now we've got Tucker Carlson touching on it. But where are the politicians talking about this? And look, I have an immense respect for Trump, but why is Trump not talking about this? Every message I see him put out is he's criticizing Biden. He's talking about the election. He's talking about what's happening with the overall current administration, the state of the world, what's happening with Russia. Why is he not putting something out? As a leader of the people, that believe in freedom and independence and our sovereign right to live our lives and survive, why is he not out there saying, hey, folks, here's just a message from the man who cares about you as a people. Go plant a garden. Why is he not doing this? And a lot of people I follow on Telegram that are they're good people. It's not that I think they're intentionally misleading you, but I think a lot of people are missing the mark. And when I see people going into these long articles about, well, here's why the Patriots are still in control, and here's why they have the plan, and you see a lot of people, they're missing this. And again, if you saw on Telegram before I did today's show last night, I put a poll out. Do you want me to talk about Disney and what's happening with the food crisis? And I actually thought that most of you would probably choose Disney because maybe you wanted a little bit different of a topic than, hey, the great reset's unraveling as a freight train heading towards us. But I was actually surprised and glad. I read all the comments, and a lot of you said, look, we have to face this. We have to prepare for this. And that really warms my heart because this is what we have to do. We have to be very realistic about what's happening. I don't just want to bury our heads in the sand and say, well, look, Matt Gaetz just handed the Hunter Biden's laptop over. And look, if we can't feed ourselves in 6 months or a year, and if we spend our time right now just searching through Telegram and watching videos and trying to understand when Trump's going to come back in, if that's where we occupy our time and we're not actively trying to do what's right for faith, it's going to come back and bite us. And I feel like I have a responsibility to share this information with you. Do I believe Trump is still working behind the scenes? I do. I think he's trying his best. But there's a bigger picture. I can't make sense of how he's not talking about this. So again, I'm not trying to be the person that's fear-mongering, but I think this is just such crucial information for you. And this is a photo I'm going to share. I'm on one of the Bards FM family chats on Telegram. This is a picture that a woman shared yesterday at her local Walmart. You know what this is? This is the egg aisle. This is what she shared. This isn't some picture from Venezuela. She was literally at Walmart. This is where she would normally go to purchase eggs. Look how empty that is. Now, we know that there's an avian flu spreading around. We know that there's other things, but this is much bigger than that. Because what do chickens eat? Well, chickens eat grains. They eat corn. They eat the items that the farmers are supposed to be growing. Now, as I mentioned, they had a great crop last year, but we're only just now starting to see what's going to be happening. Now, let me show you what's happening in China. If you watch the video I did with Rob recently on China, we showed this. This is what true panic buying looks like. This is Shanghai. So in China, they have locked down tens of millions of people. They've locked down almost the entire city of Shanghai, which again, this also concerns me because our favorite little gnome Fauci is out talking about how he's expecting another round of lockdowns, which I think they're going to try to do. I think that their goal is to get through the midterms, or on their best behavior, getting through midterms. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, lockdowns are back. There's a new variant. I even heard someone talk, I think it was my wife told me in Australia that they have the Deltacron variant. Oh my goodness, it's going to be eventually it's just going to be like the variant from Mordor, or the Kraken variant, or the Frankenstein variant. They're trying, but this, again, we're still on just like step 2 of the Great Reset plan. I believe they will fail, which we'll talk about in a little bit here, but these are real things. So in China, they're experiencing massive, massive lockdowns. So let me just show you this video. This is a grocery store in China. This was shot, this is recent. This is in Shanghai. I don't want to use predictive programming here, but I think that honestly, within 1 to 2 years, this could be what you're seeing at your local Kroger in America.
你看看他妈的，我到超市里抢光了，这啥路数啊？哎呀，没人能去啊，干嘛啥杂乱嘛？
Empty shelves. That's got his kind of showing off his vegetable collection that he bought there, but that's China right now. So you have to ask yourself, if that was your local grocery store, what would you be doing right now? Because we have to be proactive. We have to be planning. Now, it's going to show you quickly. I've been telling you that the crops coming in from last year were very strong in America, right? So here's just a graph. This is showing us the prices. They're graphing the prices of corn, which is currently at $7.47 a bushel. But let's look at this. So again, this is showing 5 years out, back to 2018 or so up to 2022, or 4 years roughly. And for those of you that are just listening, this is a chart showing the price increase of corn. So back in mid 2020, the price of corn per bushel was close to $3 per bushel, right? And I think that some of that had to do with what was happening with COVID. There's all kinds of lockdowns, et cetera. Back in 2019, though, you had our average, which was hovering around $3.50. As soon as Ukraine and Russia unfolded, you see a vertical line where corn is now at around $7.50 per bushel. Now, the food that you're eating on the shelves right now, when you go to your local grocery store and you get your ground beef, say you're paying $6 a pound, or you want organic, it's $9 a pound, et cetera, that hasn't been affected yet, because we're still, those animals, they didn't butcher those animals yesterday with corn they bought the day before. We're still living off of a strong crop from last year. But even if America still has a strong crop, which is predicted, I mean, there's no experts that are saying that America will stop producing crops. And unless a severe drought hits or severe flooding, it's expected America is going to keep producing a large amount of the crops that we normally produce. Yeah, we have off years, but on average, though, America is a breadbasket, especially the Midwest. But what happens around the world affects us. And so if we have a price, why is corn then, if we're producing the same amount of corn as we did last year, why is corn all of a sudden doubled in price? Why is it now $7.50 per bushel? Whereas it was, a year and a half ago, it was $3 or $3.50. Again, it's what this article talked about. We're seeing increased price in fertilizer. Most corn grown in America is Monsanto GMO. Most of it actually ends up being animal feed. A lot of it goes into high fructose corn syrup, other things that we ethanol, which is involved in gasoline. But again, as these prices increase, you're going to see it trickling across everything. Now, what I wanted to show you, though, earlier I mentioned that I'm going to prove to you that our government is actively trying to kill us. Which I hate kind of talking like that. It's not the entirety of our government. There's a lot of people that are in our government that are actually really good people, and they really care about people. And I know a lot of them. I know a lot of politicians. But at the top, though, there's something much more sinister happening, especially if you look at them saying, here's how you can survive this. I looked at a Bloomberg article recently. They said, okay, there's going to be inflation, and here's how you have to do. Okay, you have to learn to eat less meat. You have to drive less. You have to conserve energy. But they're not telling us what we need to know. So I'm going to go back in history a little bit to the Victory Gardens. So this is an incredible article. This is back on the History Channel, talking about what happened in history and how our government responded. So listen to this, because they're telling us what we need to do. And just imagine if this was our government right now. It really helps you see how far our government has fallen. And again, when I read this article, you see that they know this. The people in charge, they know this. It also makes me wonder, why is Trump not talking about this? If Trump saw a looming food crisis, why did he never talk about Victory Gardens? I don't know. Because even when he was in power, he had to have known what plan was coming up. Why was he not preparing Americans? And again, I'm not trying to blame everything on him, because actually I'm a huge supporter of him. I think he's done amazing things for us, especially with how he handled China and communism. However, it just makes me wonder, why are they not encouraging this? So let me read a little bit here for you. Okay, so this is, during World War I, a severe food crisis emerged in Europe as agricultural workers were recruited into military service and farms were transformed into battlefields. As a result, the burden of feeding millions of starving people fell to the United States. In March of 1917, just weeks before the U.S. entered war, Charles Lathrop Pack organized the National War Garden Commission to encourage Americans to contribute to the war effort by planting, fertilizing, harvesting, and storing their own fruits and vegetables so that more food could be exported to our allies. And this is something to keep in mind, is that while, I'm taking a break from the article here, while we might think that America produces a lot, what happens, and keep an eye out on this, what happens when we start seeing our politicians saying, hey, we need to start shipping our wheat to Ukraine? Because we haven't entered into that. And what do we know about the liberal government, especially the more liberal side of our government? They love giving our money away. They love just sending $25 million over to Pakistan for gender studies. I can already see it. I can already see Biden coming out and saying that, you know what, we're going to take a hit as the American people. We're going to be sending, 1 million tons of corn to Ukraine to help out in the crisis. They're already saying this. They're already saying, look, you should be able to deal with high gas prices because you're helping the Ukrainians. They're already seeding this stuff. But in history, though, this really happened. A lot of the food that was grown in America was sent overseas to feed troops, our own troops, the other troops that were fighting alongside of us. So what he says here is that the war is this is the War Garden Commission, and that the war effort by they're encouraging Americans to plant, fertilize, harvest, and store their own fruits and vegetables so that more food could be exported to our allies. Citizens were urged to utilize all idle land that was not already engaged in agricultural production, including school and company grounds, parks, backyards, or any available vacant lots. So what you had across America, there were gardens popping up everywhere. Even in a local courtyard, say at a school or your local town square, people were just planting gardens. It was a national effort to do this. So amateur gardeners were provided with instruction pamphlets on how, when, and where to sow, and were offered suggestions as to the best crops to plant, along with tips on preventing disease and insect infestations. The endeavor was so well received, the government turned its attention to distributing canning and drying manuals to help people preserve their surplus crops. In addition to the appeal to men and women, the Federal Bureau of Education initiated a U.S. school garden army to mobilize children to enlist as, quote, soldiers of the soil. See, now they're teaching our kids gender studies. They're teaching them how to, figure out which of the 37 pronouns they are. Whereas back then, they're teaching kids how to grow food and survive, how to feed their families. Boy, have things changed. As a result of these combined efforts, 3 million new garden plots were planted in 1917 and more than 5.2 million were cultivated in 1918, which generated an estimated 1.45 million quarts of canned fruits and vegetables. So shortly after the U.S. was drawn into the Second World War, victory gardens began to reemerge. Once again, commercial crops were diverted to the military overseas while transportation was redirected towards moving troops and munitions instead of food. So with the introduction of food rationing into the U.S. in the spring of 1942, Americans had an even greater incentive to grow their own fruits and vegetables in whichever locations they could find. small flower boxes, apartment rooftops, backyards, or deserted lots of any size. Amid protests from the Department of Agriculture, Eleanor Roosevelt even planted a victory garden on the White House lawn. Some of the most popular produce grown included beans, beets, cabbage, carrots, kale, kohlrabi, lettuce, peas, tomatoes, turnips, squash, and Swiss chard. Through the distribution of several million government-sponsored pamphlets, fledgling farmers were advised to maximize their garden's productivity by practicing succession planting and were encouraged to record the germination rates of seeds along with any diseases or insects they may have encountered in order to minimize waste and improve the garden's output the following year. So listen to this. This is how much food they produce. This is incredible. So throughout both world wars, the Victory Garden campaign served as a successful means of boosting morale, expressing patriotism, safeguarding against food shortages on the home front, and easing the burden of commercial farmers working arduously to feed troops and civilians overseas. In 1942, roughly 15 million families planted Victory Gardens. By 1944, an estimated 20 million Victory Gardens produced roughly 8 million tons of food, which was the equivalent, listen to this is so important, which was the equivalent of more than 40% of all the fresh fruits and vegetables consumed in the United States. The Victory Gardens produced more than 40% of the food consumed in the United States. You have to ask yourself, why are they not teaching us this now? Why do you have Bill Gates coming out and saying, you need to get used to eating bugs? Why is Biden pushing the Green New Deal and these socialist policies? Why aren't they doing this again? We have a beautiful lesson in history of how the people of America teamed up together with this beautiful spirit to help the farmers and to help the communities. And they came together as people to grow these gardens. And they survived. And they produced 40% of the overall produce, fruits and vegetables that were consumed in America. It's incredible. But again, it goes to show you, why aren't they telling us it? Honestly, they're not stupid. There's only one reason that makes sense to me, is that they don't want us to do this. They don't want us to be independent. They don't want us to be able to produce our own food, because so much of our government, they're driving us straight into their beast system, because they want us to, when the food crisis hits, they want us to be standing up in line and waiting for our next little package and scanning our vaccine passport so we can get our next package of food. And then if we want to buy something else, we can use our central bank digital currency to go purchase something. That's what they want for us. But we can fight back. And that's why, as you'll see me talk about this a lot, and actually Scott Kesterman really hits on this a lot in Bards of Him as well, that for us to go forward, we have to go backwards. We have to look at how people lived in the 30s, how people lived in the 40s. We have to change our modern lifestyle, because they've intentionally done this. They have been driving us into this place in history where we are so dependent on their systems. And that's how the whole beast system works. We're so dependent. We need the government so much. They then make the rules. They will then tell us, you know what? You got to get at least one booster every month to keep up your food supply. And who knows what they're going to be putting into these things. So this is why it is so, so important for us to become independent of that system, to plant our own gardens, to learn how to raise things like chickens. Like, we're getting goats soon. So I'm gonna be able to learn how to raise goats and milk goats. Having gardens is so important. So in terms of, I know that we're already at 3:00, but in terms of how we prepare for this, and I'll be getting into more things in the Q&A, is that, as I mentioned earlier, please, if you feel overwhelmed by this, just keep in mind that the majority of Americans are not prepping. The majority of Americans are not going out and starting gardens. So even if you start a little window garden, say you live in an apartment, you can actually, if you look up, go to online and search for cheap ways to grow food indoors, you can do very inexpensive systems where, just using LED lights you buy at the hardware store, for maybe $100, you can create a setup where you can start growing food inside. Now, that food, I'm not going to say that food's going to feed your family, but that food combined with some other things that you've bought and you've set aside can really make a big difference. Because so in terms of timeline with this is important. I think that realistically that we're not going to see the real food shortages, like the empty shelves like that. You're going to see different things. You see different elements of panic buying, right? You're going to see things like, when Tucker Carlson does a big expose on something, or when CNN covers it, you're going to see little surges of panic buying where people are all rushing out all at once. But the United States has a lot of food in it already. So I think that we probably have at least a good 6 to 12 months, maybe a little bit longer, to really start preparing before we're hitting into these situations where you go and you have these empty shelves. One of the important things, though, and one of the most important things that you can buy right now is seeds. And I know a lot of you have asked me where I buy my seeds, so actually I'll show you. I pulled up the website for you. All right, so this is where we purchase our seeds. It's called Fedco Seeds. Now, my wife and I are very particular about eating organic, and we're especially looking for heirloom, which is the heirlooms are much older breeds, older original varieties. They haven't been crossbred a lot of times. So heirloom. So this is Fedco Seeds. It's literally fedcoseeds.com. It's FEDCO seeds.com. But you come on here and you can see they've got just huge list of seeds, and they're inexpensive, right? So they're very, very inexpensive. So say you want to come buy some bean seeds, hypothetically, right? Where they have like a provider, right? So the provider, these are the green beans that we purchase, right? You can get 1 pound of seeds for $8. You can literally buy 1 pound of, these are organic, provider bush green bean seeds for $8. So gardening does not have to be expensive. Now, if you're in an area where there's not good soil, you can do raised beds. You can use cinder blocks to build little raised beds. If you're in an apartment, you can still grow things inside. And I recommend, well, first off, if you're living in an apartment, I do recommend trying to look into how you can change your living situation, even if it means renting a house a little further outside of a town, or getting a little townhome to have more land. Even if you have a little backyard terrace that you can set up to start growing, because every little thing that you can do to provide your own food security is going to go a long way. And gardening is, I would say, one of the most important skills that you can have. So if you're looking for, as I mentioned, if you feel overwhelmed, start small. Look, I lived in New York City for almost 15 years, from 2008 to, from almost 2020, right? So however many years, 12, 13 years. And I never gardened at all in New York City. I lived in a high rise. I couldn't garden. Nothing large. Yeah, I had small house plants, but I wasn't focused on it. So when my wife and I moved back to Ohio in 2020, we set up, it was a learning process, but we set up little raised bed and gardens in the backyard of a house we were renting. And we learned so much from gardening in just that one season of growing, that now that we moved and we bought a house in the country, we have such a great foundation to start growing from. So that's a big thing. The other thing to ensure that you're not going to be forced into this system is just buying some food and setting it aside. And again, I've covered this, and I did a long episode on prepping. I'm going to continue to do more shows on prepping, but it's as simple as going to Costco or even Walmart, buying, say dry rice, buying dry beans, buying canned beans. There are things that are so inexpensive to set aside. And look, even if you buy, say 50 pounds of white rice, say you've got a family, it's just say it's you and your spouse. You buy 50 pounds of white rice and you get, a few dozen cans of beans. You can live off of that probably for a month or two. Now, you have to do the calculations for calories, but in a situation where nobody else is preparing, you can have enough food to last a good month or two. So taking this seriously now, and this is why I wanted to go through the show with you and show you in detail about what this all means. But if you take it seriously now, what they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Right now, we still have time to prevent. You can still go to Costco, you can still go to Walmart, you can buy these food items. You can still research it. Look, I've got my own shows on prepping, but go to YouTube and just search for 10 ways to prep on a budget, how to prep in an apartment. There is a wealth of information that you can find on how you can start taking steps. And there's a lot of people that have learned how to do this, living in an RV. They've prepped and they're gardening, living in an RV somehow. So there are so many resources out there for you that I really recommend that you research those. And as I mentioned, I will continue to put out more content about this because I think it's very, very important. And again, this is why you don't see me talking about Hunter Biden's laptop. Maybe I'll do a show on it at some point. But to me, it's like, if I'm not actively helping you take steps to ensure the safety and survival of your family, and I'm distracting you with, where's Durham and, the honey badger, Bill Barr and all these things, I don't think I'm doing you any service. So, so I hope this has been very helpful for you. So, folks, we're now going to go over to Rise TV for the Q&A. And I gave it a little bit plug at the beginning, but so Rise TV is a beautiful platform. It's a streaming platform. We've got over 400 or 500 videos on there about all kinds of content that was, a lot of it was actually too juicy to be on YouTube. So a lot of content you won't find on public. We talk about the deep state. We talk about, the pandemic. We do some deep dives and information. I've got a few partners over there that have created beautiful content, and we are building this amazing community. So if you go over there and you want to join the Q&A after the show, there's a link for a free trial in the description. And what we do is we have a Q&A. So say you want to ask me, hey, Seth, what kind of rice do you recommend? Or, hey, Seth, I want to buy a gun and I don't have a gun. What do you recommend? That's where we have a discussion. But you're also going to meet other patriots that are on there, that they're going to be sharing your questions. And whenever I go over to Rise TV, I always see the, hey, nice to see you. Nice to see you. There's friends, there's community there, because I think a lot of us probably feel isolated. We're alone. We're mocked by the mainstream media. We have, Merrick Garland calling us terrorists. So it's kind of a nice feeling when you can meet folks that have the similar viewpoint as you. And we work through, because we will get through this. I know it's a frightening freight train that's heading towards us, but I believe that we will get through it. And even though it might be difficult, look at the flood, right? Like if we knew there was a massive flood coming that was going to wipe out most of the earth, we'd probably be running around with our head like a chicken with the head cut off. But actually the people that had faith still got through. And that's my final important thing to say before I hop over to Rise TV only, is that faith is your most important prepping tool. Because I believe that, look, if the only people that will survive are the people that have the money to build bunkers and to have a 10-year food stash, well, it's the same elites that need to be destroyed that will be surviving. So looking at Noah's Ark as an example, Noah had faith, and that's what saved him. He wasn't the king. He didn't have mounds of gold. He had faith. And so whatever that means for you, fixing our faith, returning to tradition, bringing back morality into our lives, and really asking God to help us through these times. If we ask, I believe that we will be helped. So that's the most important thing, because that's the one thing is that say you literally are living on welfare and you're living in a one bedroom or a studio, and you have maybe $5 extra every month. Having faith is free. It doesn't cost you anything. And so if you can really dedicate yourself and say, what, Lord, please help me get through this. I'm going to look for the signs. Maybe he'll open doors for you. But I think that is the most important thing. That's the foundation. So, all right, folks. Well, for those of you that watched me on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and the other places that we're streaming, thank you so much. A reminder that if you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, at least go watch on Rumble. At least go try to watch on Rumble. And if you want to come over to Rise TV, as I mentioned, there's a free trial in the description below. If you want to stick around, it's $9.99 per month. It's the cost of a couple of coffees if you wanted to stick around. If you can't, if you're really tight on money and you still want to help out, you can share the video. And again, that's why I will continue to do as much free content as possible, because I don't want everything I'm doing just stuck behind a paywall. I want to continue to reach you and talk to you and allow you to share this information with your friends and family. So the paywall is really for those of you that are able to support and want to support. And we give you a lot back. It's not like we're asking for a donation. We have built this beautiful website. We've got so much content on there. So that way you feel like, wow, I'm supporting Seth and his family, yet I also get these amazing videos and the live shows and the Q&A and all that. So I hope to see you over there. So folks, thank you for joining me. We're going to head over to Rise TV now. And Dom, you can go ahead and cut off the streams to the public platforms. All right. So Rise family, it is so good to see you all. Let me get this pulled up quickly and get my questions ready. Just as a reminder, if you have a question for me, just write question, all caps in there,